Welcome to the Emotional Eating Unwrapped podcast. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, an emotional eating and weight loss coach for women looking to fall in love with eating, create healthy attachments with food, and lose weight sustainably. Hello, and welcome to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and today we're going to be talking about rebellion. Not the loud, flashy kind, not like the kind of rebellion where you throw a chair at something or you smack down, a baseball bat or something like that, but the kind that shows up, kind of in solitude, right? The kind that shows up late at night when the house is quiet, when there's space, when there's not a lot of distraction or stimulation around, and you find yourself over the sink eating out of an ice cream carton, eating a bag of chips mindlessly, and you tell yourself, the energy around this eating behavior is like, screw it, I deserve this. Right? The kind that says like, no one controls me. Even if that control is only happening, even though the only way you're actually expressing the control at the moment is through your compulsive and urgent actions and behaviors with food. So today's episode, we're going to talk about these moments when food becomes your language, right? Your way of saying, I'm here. I'm still here. And you're also saying, I'm not playing by rules anymore. I have agency. We're talking about expressing your agency through your eating behavior and through food. And so if you've ever felt stuck in that loop of eating as rebellion, and maybe this is the first time that you've been able to really name that that's something that is going on with you, which is super important, because when we can start to name our emotions, we can really accelerate our healing. So starting to recognize what that, the nuance of feelings that go along, and the nuance of energy that goes along with the behaviors around eating for you, that is super important. So if you've been finding yourself in that loop of eating as rebellion, or if you keep finding yourself swinging between being good and going off the rails, I want today's episode to be a deeper dive into really what's actually going on. So here's something that I want to say. Here's something that I really want to just say out loud, because not many people, maybe not no one, but not many people that I know talk about it. We talk about emotional eating, emotional overeating. It's become a lot more in the mainstream these days. And we talk about it as it relates to comfort, as it relates to hiding, right? As it relates to sadness. But what we're talking about is eating from a place of defiance. It's this little quiet rebellion. Because for so many of us, especially women, and I think that this energy is much more prevalent with women, because oftentimes we have spent our entire lives following rules, right? Following rules that were actually upon us, right? Back in the day, and rules that were subliminally taught to us. And so we've been following these rules where we're the responsible one, we're the keeping the peace one, we're the one that brings the good vibes, we're the chill one. And food and your behavior with eating becomes the only place where you stop performing, right? It's the only place where you don't have to be wearing this mask. And so when everything else in your life feels dictated, food feels like freedom. Eating, the act of eating, feels like you're expressing an act of freedom. Right? And it's not in like a gentle, heart open, I'm free kind of way. It's more like don't tell me what the F to do kind of way. There's like this urgency and there's like this anger underneath. And there's the energy. If you really look under the hood of the energy, if we're looking at the truth, it can feel powerful, right? There's a certain part of our brain, probably a more primitive part of our brain that's like, me want this now and I'm going to get it, feels powerful. Because in the moment, it could feel like we're taking something back. It could feel that way, like it's claiming your space, like saying, I have to get what I have to get what I want and I get to have what I want. But then what happens is you're in this energy and then the moment ends and you're left with you and you're left with the same you that was there before. But now your prefrontal cortex has kicked in and your ability to analyze and sort of reflect and and take and process what action just happened. And then guilt creeps in, shame can creep in, and we start to create more disconnection from ourselves because of those really uncomfortable and dark feelings that are rising up within us, right? We just want to push it away. We just want to escape from it. And so suddenly what happens is the thing that just felt like freedom pulls you deeper into a pattern that you swore the other day that you'd stop repeating. It's really important that we understand where this comes from. Okay, it's really important that we understand where this comes from and that we understand that these are two different things, right? Like you acting out your rebellion through eating has nothing to do with the food that you're eating, with the actual substance that you're eating. And I think that it's really important that you recognize that the rebellion isn't about the food, it's about the behavior of eating. Okay. And so, where does this even come from, right? Most of us just didn't wake up one day and decide to rebel with food, right? It's usually something that we learned quite early on by observing other people's behaviors and dynamics with food and how they used food to provide them something, right? So maybe you grew up in a house where food was super controlled, right? Where getting a second helping of something meant, getting a second helping of some sort of food meant something about you, right? It meant you got judgment from somebody. It meant that, there was a flaw in you or that there was something in the future that you need to be afraid of. And maybe you grew up in a house where being good and being desired meant being thin, being agreeable, being small. Or maybe no one ever directly taught you how to eat or told you. Maybe no one even explained food to you in a way other than it needed to be something that you're disciplined around. So what happened is you internalized this correlation that's not a true correlation, that control equals approval, that hypervigilance around food and having a morality clause around food and following that means that approval and validation and being desired and belonging is going to happen easier for you. Okay, but eventually, and usually this happens for people at different stages of their lives. That's why in my mentorship program, I have women from like 25 to 75 in my program, right? Because when we decide to wake up from this and heal, it could be at any age, right? But eventually something in you said, I'm done with this, right? Something in you said, I'm done. I'm done with these morality negotiations and, these rules, these rules. And you're like, I'm over it. And if you weren't taught how to express your feeling of being suppressed through word, Okay, so say like you started to feel like your boundaries were being crossed, right? And maybe you didn't even know that, like that you, maybe your words didn't even understand that, but your body understood that. Okay, your body understood that something was off in the dynamic of your environment. You found a place to channel that energy and rebel, and that was with food. Whether that was restricting food, micromanaging, and being like hypervigilant around controlling food, or potentially binging, like the F it mentality. And maybe sometimes, like for many of the women I work with and for myself for decades, it was both. Right? There were weeks where it was like strict controlling. And then it was like, F it, I'm just going to eat whatever I want. Right. And go through that loop of feeling shame and guilt and then restrict and that whole thing again. Right. Because ultimately, what was happening, food was my focal point of all of it. And that's what we're trying to break. And that's what we're trying to heal. But that's the problem with rebellion through food. Because there's nothing wrong with the fact that you wanna push back, right? The rebellion energy makes a lot of sense, right? Especially if you're now listening to this and you're thinking back to your own life and your own formative years, and you're like, "Yeah, I did get those subliminal messages," or maybe they weren't even subliminal, maybe they were outright direct about food. Or I did observe, the people in my life and the women in my life, making comments about food in a way that made me feel like there was a moral connection between food and my worth, right? So there's completely nothing wrong with the fact that part of you wanted to push back, but the hard truth of it all is that when food and your eating habits become your only outlet for that rebellion, it ends up hurting you as an adult more than it helps. And of course it hurts as a teenager, as a like myself, I started these types of behaviors as a teenager, but I didn't really feel how it was hurting my life until I became a younger adult, my mid 20s, when I wanted to try to create, relationships, and I wanted to form, intimate relationships. I wanted to be courageous and put myself out there a little bit more in the world. And I wanted to, I wanted to, yeah, I wanted to feel more engaged with life, but I didn't have a connection to myself because of all of the severing I did through the many years with my eating. Right? Because my brain was so focused on food and eating, I didn't have the skills to be in the world as what I thought when I looked around, like a lot of young adults were able to do. I was very hard on myself. I was afraid of being imperfect. If one thing didn't go right, in dating or something happened, I freaked out. I swung from like, everything was amazing to, oh my God, this is a disaster, right? Like I didn't know how to regulate the middle, right? I didn't understand that there was a very big gray area to life. T- That that is where we end up hurting ourselves when we have this relationship with food, because then we end up taking that black and white attitude in our lives and in our relationships and in the ways that we want to show up in the world. And what I hear from women all the time, and myself, when I was in those years of the cycle, is I know, we say to ourselves, I know I'm doing this. I know it doesn't work. I know that using food as my rebellion, or to act out my feelings of frustration, um, you know, whatever it is, right? Like my feelings of suppression, I know it doesn't work, but I don't know how else to feel powerful. And that's the real thing. I don't know how else to feel real. I don't know how else to feel like I have power in this world. And I'm not talking about power like greed or, like when people are power hungry. I'm talking about like I have life force in this world that can move energy in a positive way. Right? That's going to be received positively by society. That's going to be received positively where I could also feel desired and appreciated. If you don't have other areas in your life, because maybe you haven't developed the skills to be able to collaborate energetically with people in that way, food is going to be the place where you act out this thing. And so it's not, but at the end of the day, it's not about food at all. It's about expressing, right? It's about finally doing something that feels like I said, like yours, like I am here. I am life force. I remember what it felt like to be stuck in the cycle of emotional eating. I tried every diet out there, counting, tracking, restricting, but nothing ever worked. Food controlled my life, my thoughts, and I constantly felt guilty after eating. But once I learned how to heal the emotional triggers behind my eating and trust my body, everything changed. I stopped obsessing over food, the weight started coming off naturally, and I found real freedom in how I ate and lived. So, I created the Sober Eating year-long mentorship to help other women experience the same transformation. So you can stop battling with food, you can lose weight without deprivation, and you can feel confident in your body again. In this mentorship, you'll have access to my proven nervous system rewiring method. You'll have access to live coaching with me, weekly accountability, and a community of women who truly understand your journey. You'll also have free access to my signature programs, the Emotional Eating Solution and Decoding Permanent Weight Loss, valued at $2,000. Click the link in the show notes to explore the mentorship today. You don't have to do this alone. I'll be right there with you every step of the way. As we know, when we do it through the eating experience and through using the substance of food to be our, our I guess our substance of choice to engage in this feeling of power, it always ends up in shame or regret. And so finding a new way to channel that energy of feeling, of feeling frustrated, disappointed, underappreciated, suppressed, you have to find a new way for that. You first also have to recognize that that's the emotion that's underneath. Okay, so how do we transmute the energy, right? How do we move it into a place where we can reclaim our power without punishing ourselves in this way that we end up doing when we use food and our eating habits as weapons? That's the word I was thinking about before, weaponizing it. So let's talk about that. So, I know that we want to first acknowledge, like I said, you want to acknowledge your feelings, and then you want to honor the part of you that wants freedom. Right? So the rebellion itself, that energy is like a good energy. That message that is coming up and being like, I'm feeling an edginess that's arising, right? I'm feeling an edginess that's coming up. Something feels like it's rising in me. That's good. You don't need to be afraid of that. You don't need to release that valve with food, as we're saying, right? You don't need to be afraid of it, right? We're going to transmute that energy into something that's going to make you feel more connected to yourself. And that's going to look like small shifts, right? Things like choosing food you actually want, not what you should eat. Right. I was having a conversation with someone in our coaching call just this past week, and she was talking about how she has and it was so amazing because it's so beautiful. The women here in the mentorship of these great awarenesses, and they're so smart. So it's really such a fun environment. But she was saying how she recognized that in her eating habit, she's attached to timing. Like she's attached to the time she has to eat in a day. And so she has anxiety around the time that she has to eat in the day. So, she feels like she's married to these like times to have lunch and time to have dinner. And then if she gets hungry before, like wants to eat something before the time, then it stresses her out because it makes her feel like, she doesn't know what to do because what is she going to do with the time, right? So there's all of this out, externally outsourced agency. And it's exactly what we're talking about here. So she shares that what happens is like when she tries to abide by the timing, she ends up at night secretly eating the stuff that like, the stuff that she really, the, like in more volume, the quote unquote like indulgent stuff that she fully could have had all day, but she didn't because she followed these rules of timing and felt like she didn't have permission to follow her natural rhythm. So later in the day, she rebelled against the rules with eating, right? So this is exactly what we're talking about, right? So it's choosing food that you actually want, not what you should eat. It's choosing to eat when you want, not some idea of what time, right? I eat at different times every day. Sometimes I'm hungry at 9:30 in the morning. Sometimes I'm not hungry at 9:30 in the morning. It's like, you eat when, you eat, the rhythm needs to become more of a flow. But to get worried about some external force dictating when you should eat and then shaming yourself when you eat outside of those time frames, and then later in the day eating more stuff that you don't even necessarily want only to rebel, that's not where we want to be. Right? And then getting yourself into getting yourself into a space with your emotions, with your nervous system, where you prioritize your energy. So that might mean saying no to plans when you're exhausted. A lot of times when we say yes when we mean no, we end up rebelling with food. And also, you don't need to over explain yourself because that's a lot of energy also. So a lot of times food is an act of rebellion and an act of replenishment for energy that we've given to others because we aren't comfortable in our own nervous system to prioritize ourselves first. Okay. And so you don't owe people a 10-minute explanation. Okay. So that's that too. Another small shift can be setting boundaries around, like I said, like around your meals, around your energy, allowing yourself to eat something indulgent or have pleasure in your day on purpose, right? Like actually planning ahead to give yourself something pleasuring. It could be food, it could not be food. And then also allowing yourself not to be perfect. So the example I told you before about the woman with, who was struggling with what time to eat, there was a lot of perfectionism there. There was a lot of like, this is the right, this is the wrong, right? Like, what do I do? It's like, what do I do if I did it wrong? But there's no doing it wrong. Right? You're allowed to eat when you want to eat, right? Without having to rebel to get it. You're allowed to eat what you want as well. And eating what you want doesn't mean you have to overeat what you want. Okay. And so that is another skill that, we're not talking about this today. It's something that I do teach in the mentorship is how do you get to that place where you eat what you want, but that doesn't trigger that switch to overeat. Because you need to learn how to do that so that you can eat whatever you want. Because we're not in the intuitive eating philosophy here where you just eat what you want when you want, right? That's not it. Right? You do it on purpose, right? You do it in a responsible way because you know yourself and you've created boundaries with yourself that don't feel like restrictions. Okay. And when you start to do this, you're going to realize and you're going to feel in your body your true power. Right? You're going to feel your true power because you're exerting it in how you're moving through the world and the decisions you're making and the choices you're making. In the, you know, in the compassionate limitations that you're putting on yourself, in the way that you're learning how to communicate and use words to express. And once you start to have these other tools, you're not going to need food to be your language. Okay. So before we go, I just want to give some final thoughts. Like if you've been using food as your outlet and, you feel like it's the only place that you can go, right? If you're sitting here and you're like, yeah, this sounds all good, but I don't think I can stop doing it. I want you to just really say to yourself, I am in charge. The energy that's rising within you is totally valid. There's nothing wrong with that energy. It doesn't need to be stuffed down. It needs to be let out. It needs to be expressed, but it doesn't need to be a rebellion that is really a rebellion on yourself. Okay. You don't need to rebel against yourself to reclaim your power because it's not going to happen. All that's going to do is disconnect you from yourself. And the way that you get power, true power, is by connection to yourself and then expressing yourself in a way that, in a way that's healthy, in a way that's adaptive. And then food becomes something that is more neutral in your life. Your eating habits become something that's more neutral in your life. And if you're interested, if you're interested in weight loss, or you're trying to do that, it just becomes natural, right? Because when you're not weaponizing food in this way, your body starts to support you. And that includes losing weight if there's weight to be lost, right? That's what happened to me, right? When I finally tried to stop losing weight, which was basically like the cycle I'm telling you about right now, and I just focused on connecting to myself and understanding myself and building out the skills that I'm talking to you about, like expression and self-awareness and emotional regulation, boundaries. Right? When I started doing that, my body calmed down and the weight came off. Truly. Like it wasn't a thing because I created a rhythm. I didn't even create it on purpose, right? The rhythm unfolded over time. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I guess this is what my body likes, right? This is how my body works best, right? The natural structure that you're looking for unfolds through connection to yourself. Okay, so let this be your season where the energy that arises moves from rebellion to expression, not self-sabotage. Because you're not obeying anybody. You're not here to obey any random rule, whether that was from your grandma or your mom or her mom or your grandma's mom, right? Or whether it's society or whether it's some diet that you were on for 2 years that you've decided to stop doing. Congratulations, right? You're here to belong to yourself again. You're here to belong to yourself again. And that is the work. That is the work. Okay, so thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like the episode, please leave us a comment either on Spotify or on YouTube if you're watching there. You can like us on Spotify and Apple. We are on both of those platforms streaming our podcast. And that's it. Until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.